She humiliated a man in a MAGA hat, thinking she was in control until she found out he was the owner of the airline. One mistake, one twist, and her career would never be the same. Stay tuned. Before you speak or act against someone, think twice. The person standing calmly, speaking kindly without anger or abuse, might be far more powerful and influential than they appear. Never underestimate simplicity. Sometimes, the most unassuming people hold the greatest strength. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. It was a typical morning at the airport, the kind that bustled with energy as travelers hurried through terminals, dragging suitcases and clutching coffee cups. The sound of announcements echoed through the halls, blending with the faint hum of jet engines in the background. Lisa Carter, a seasoned flight attendant in her late 30s, stood by the boarding gate, her uniform impeccable, her posture commanding. She had a reputation for being sharp, assertive, and fiercely principled. To Lisa, her job wasn't just about safety demonstrations and serving drinks. It was about maintaining order and ensuring respect among everyone on board. As passengers began filing into the aircraft, Lisa's sharp eyes scanned them, her expression composed but attentive. She greeted each person with a practiced smile, nodding politely to the families, business travelers, and occasional solo wanderers. For Lisa, this routine was second nature. She prided herself on her ability to handle even the most difficult situations with grace and authority. But she also had a fiery side, one that emerged when she felt her principles were being challenged. John Walker boarded the plane quietly, a man in his mid-40s with a calm and collected demeanor. He carried a single book in his hand, his belongings neatly tucked under his arm. His expression was neutral, almost unreadable, as he found his seat in economy class and settled in. Nothing about him stood out, except for the red cap perched on his head. The bold white letters reading, "Make America Great Again," caught Lisa's attention instantly, sending a ripple of unease through her. She froze for a moment, her gaze narrowing as she processed what she was seeing. To Lisa, the hat wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a statement, a symbol of everything she believed divided people. Her chest tightened as she watched John adjust the cap casually and open his book, completely unaware of the silent storm brewing nearby. Lisa felt a wave of anger bubbling inside her, sharp and sudden. She had dealt with difficult passengers before, but this felt different. The hat represented something she couldn't ignore, something she felt obligated to address. As the boarding process continued, Lisa couldn't shake the sight of John and his unapologetic display of the hat. Her movements became slightly more brisk, her polite smiles strained. She kept glancing in his direction, her mind racing with thoughts about what his choice of accessory meant. To her, it wasn't just fabric and thread, it was a challenge, an affront to the values she held dear. And as she returned to the galley to prepare for the flight, she knew this was not something she could let slide. As the passengers settled into their seats, Lisa's eyes kept returning to John. She moved through the aisle with practiced efficiency, offering assistance and checking overhead bins. But her focus repeatedly drifted to the man sitting quietly in economy class. His red cap, bright and bold, stood out like a beacon. It wasn't just an accessory to Lisa, it was a statement, one she found deeply unsettling. With every glance, her irritation grew, simmering beneath her composed exterior. Passengers exchanged polite nods and made small talk, oblivious to the storm brewing in Lisa's mind. She moved past row after row, plastering on a smile that felt increasingly strained. Her thoughts spiraled with every step. How could someone be so brazen, she thought. To her, the hat wasn't just offensive, it was provocative, almost daring her to react. When she returned to the galley, the tension in her shoulders was evident. She began muttering to her colleagues, her voice low but sharp enough to convey her frustration. "Can you believe it?" she said, gesturing discreetly toward the cabin. "He's just sitting there, flaunting that symbol of hate like it's nothing." Her colleague, Angela, a senior flight attendant with years of experience, gave her a measured look. "Lisa, let it go. It's just a hat. We've got a flight to run and passengers to keep happy. Focus on that." Lisa scoffed, her jaw tightening. "It's not just a hat, Angela. It's what it stands for. It's offensive to people, to me. Someone needs to address this." Angela sighed, shaking her head. "Our job is to keep things smooth, not stir up trouble. Let it go." But Lisa couldn't. Her mind churned as she prepared pre-flight drinks, her gaze flickering toward John's seat. She felt her principles pulling her toward action. How could she stand by when someone was wearing a symbol that to her represented division and harm? She decided she wouldn't. With a deep breath, she grabbed the tray of drinks and began making her way back into the cabin. Her polished demeanor masked the fire building inside her. As she approached John's row, her lips curved into a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nice choice of accessory," Lisa said, her tone laced with sarcasm. Her voice was loud enough to catch the attention of nearby passengers. Heads turned, eyes curious, as the tension in the air became palpable. John looked up from his book, his expression calm and composed. He smiled faintly, polite but distant, as if her comment didn't faze him. "It's just a hat," he said, his tone measured. Then, without waiting for a response, he turned back to his book. Lisa stood there for a moment, her smile faltering. His dismissiveness felt like a slight, as though her words had no weight. Her simmering irritation turned into resolve. She couldn't let it go, not when he was so unapologetic. Back in the galley, Lisa slammed the tray down harder than she intended. "Did you hear him?" she snapped to Angela. "He just brushed me off like it's no big deal. I can't let this go." Angela sighed, exasperated. "Lisa, it's not worth it. You'll only escalate things." But Lisa shook her head. "No. It's my responsibility to maintain a respectful environment for everyone. That hat is making people uncomfortable. I'm sure of it." Without waiting for Angela's reply, Lisa turned on her heel and marched back into the cabin. Her steps were purposeful, her jaw set. The passengers' murmurings grew quieter as she stopped in front of John's row. The atmosphere felt heavy, all eyes subtly shifting toward the brewing confrontation. "Sir," Lisa said, her tone formal now, the edge in her voice unmistakable. "Your hat is causing discomfort among other passengers. I'm going to have to ask you to remove it." John slowly closed his book and looked up at her. His expression was unchanged, calm, polite, and unwavering. "Thank you for your concern," he said evenly. "But I'll keep it on." The firmness in his tone made Lisa's frustration flare. She leaned slightly closer, her voice dropping lower, colder. "Then I'm afraid I'll have to inform you that this behavior violates our policy. Either you remove the hat or you'll be asked to leave the flight." The cabin fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Passengers exchanged wide-eyed glances, their whispers hushed. Lisa felt a flicker of triumph, certain that her authority would compel him to comply. John didn't argue. He stood, calm as ever, collected his belongings, and began walking toward the exit. His composure unnerved Lisa, leaving her victory feeling strangely hollow. She watched him leave, her confidence wavering for the first time. Something about the way he carried himself made her feel as though she hadn't won at all. But she shook it off, reassuring herself that she had done the right thing. After all, someone had to take a stand. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder as Lisa stood by the exit, watching security approach John's row. She had summoned them moments ago, her voice steady but firm as she explained the situation. Now, with passengers turning their heads to witness the unfolding drama, the weight of her decision pressed down on her shoulders. John remained seated, calm as ever, as the two security officers gestured for him to follow. Without a word of protest, he rose, collected his belongings, and began walking toward the exit. Lisa held her ground, her arms crossed, her chin lifted in defiance. But as John passed her, his calm, steady gaze unsettled her. There was no anger, no frustration, just a quiet resolve that made her question whether she had truly won this battle. She wanted to feel triumphant, vindicated even, but instead there was an emptiness she couldn't explain. The whispers from nearby passengers swirled around her, some murmuring approval, others exchanging uneasy glances. "It was bold," one passenger whispered to another. "I'm not sure it was necessary," someone replied, their tone uncertain. Lisa tried to block out the voices, focusing instead on maintaining her composure. She told herself that she had done the right thing, standing up for the principles she believed in. The hat, after all, symbolized something she couldn't ignore, something she felt obligated to confront. Yet John's quiet departure, devoid of resistance or retaliation, gnawed at her confidence. As the plane door closed and the final checks were made, Lisa returned to the galley. She adjusted her uniform and took a deep breath, willing herself to move past the incident. Her colleagues avoided eye contact, their silence speaking volumes. Angela, always the voice of reason, finally broke the tension with a quiet comment. "You sure about that, Lisa?" she asked, her tone measured but laced with concern. Lisa turned sharply, her expression defensive. "He was making people uncomfortable. I had to do something. It's my job to maintain order, isn't it?" Angela held her gaze for a moment before nodding slightly. "Just make sure it was the right call," she said softly, turning back to her work. The words lingered in Lisa's mind as the plane taxied down the runway. She moved through the aisles with her usual efficiency, greeting passengers and checking that everyone was buckled in. But something felt different. The whispers hadn't stopped, and she could feel eyes on her as she worked. Every glance, every hushed conversation seemed to carry a weight of judgment. And though no one said anything outright, the tension was palpable. As the flight took off, Lisa tried to focus on her duties, projecting confidence with every interaction. She smiled at passengers, offered drinks, and assisted with requests, but the nagging doubt refused to subside. Her mind replayed the incident over and over, dissecting every detail. John's calmness, his refusal to argue or react, felt like a quiet victory on his part. She hadn't raised his voice, hadn't given her the satisfaction of a confrontation. Instead, he had left her to face the consequences of her own decisions, and now those consequences felt heavier than she had anticipated. The passengers' whispers persisted, some casting curious glances her way. Lisa caught snippets of their conversations as she moved through the cabin. "Do you think he deserved it?" "I don't know. He wasn't causing any trouble, was he?" The words stung more than Lisa expected. She had been so sure of herself in the moment, so convinced that her actions were justified. Now doubt crept in, whispering that maybe she had acted out of impulse rather than reason. Maybe Angela was right. Maybe it wasn't her place to intervene. Still, Lisa held her head high, determined not to let her unease show. She moved with precision, her professionalism intact, but inside her thoughts churned. The calm facade she projected to passengers and colleagues alike was starting to crack, and she knew it. Every smile felt forced, every interaction tinged with the weight of what had transpired. As the hours passed, the tension in the cabin began to settle, but for Lisa, the unease only grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that the turbulence she had stirred wasn't over. For the first time, she questioned not just her actions, but her motivations. Had she acted out of principle, or had she let her personal feelings cloud her judgment? The answers eluded her, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. By the time the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Lisa felt drained. The confidence she had started the day with had eroded, replaced by a gnawing sense of uncertainty. As the passengers prepared to disembark, she plastered on a smile, thanking each one as they passed. But the whispers hadn't stopped, and she could feel their weight in every step she took. Lisa tried to reassure herself as she collected her belongings, telling herself that she had done the right thing. But deep down, she knew that the real turbulence wasn't behind her. It was just beginning. As the plane touched down in Los Angeles, Lisa Carter felt a sense of vindication. She held her head high as the passengers began gathering their belongings, preparing to disembark. In her mind, she had won a small but significant battle. She had stood up for what she believed was right, ensuring that offensive behavior wasn't tolerated under her watch. She couldn't wait to share the story with her friends, the triumphant tale of how she had handled a difficult passenger who refused to show basic decency. Lisa busied herself tidying the cabin as the last of the passengers exited. Her colleagues worked quietly around her, their glances occasionally lingering on her, but Lisa dismissed the tension in the air. In her mind, they just didn't understand the principles she was defending. She told herself that leadership often came with tough decisions, even if others didn't always approve. Just as she was about to leave, Lisa noticed a figure waiting near the jet bridge. It was Mark Daniels, the airline's chief operating officer. His presence immediately unsettled her. Mark rarely appeared at routine flights, and his stern expression sent a chill down her spine. As she approached, his eyes locked onto hers with a gaze so sharp it made her stop mid-step. "Lisa?" Mark said, his tone flat and cold. "We need to talk. Now." Passengers and crew alike glanced toward them, sensing the tension. Lisa's confidence wavered, but she nodded and followed him through the bustling terminal. Mark walked briskly, his silence only amplifying Lisa's growing unease. They turned into a private office tucked away from the chaos of the airport, the stark fluorescent lights casting an unflattering glow over the sterile room. Mark gestured for her to sit, closing the door behind them. Lisa lowered herself into the chair, her heart pounding. Mark remained standing for a moment, his arms crossed as he stared at her with a look that could freeze an engine mid-flight. "Do you know who you removed from that flight?" Mark asked, his voice like ice. Lisa straightened, attempting to mask her unease. "A disruptive passenger," she said, her voice firm. "He was wearing offensive attire that caused discomfort among other customers. I was ensuring the safety and comfort of everyone on board." Mark's jaw tightened, and without a word, he dropped a thick folder onto the table between them. The sound made Lisa flinch. "The disruptive passenger," Mark said slowly, "was Michael Grant, the owner of this airline." The words hit Lisa like a blow. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. Wait, what?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. Mark leaned forward, his expression unyielding. "Michael Grant often flies anonymously in economy class to observe how passengers are treated by our crew. Today, he got a very clear picture of how you handle situations." Lisa's face was drained of color. Her breath caught in her throat as the gravity of her actions sank in. She tried to respond, to explain herself, but Mark didn't give her the chance. "You didn't bother to ask questions or assess the situation objectively," Mark continued, his tone sharper now. "Instead, you let your personal beliefs dictate your actions. You humiliated a passenger based on your owner, based on your assumptions. And now we're dealing with the fallout." Lisa's voice trembled as she attempted to defend herself. "I thought I was acting in the best interest of the passengers. That Hat, Mark interrupted, his voice rising slightly, "wasn't breaking any rules. Michael wasn't causing a disturbance. You decided, on your own, that his presence was unacceptable. Do you realize how damaging this is? For you, for the airline?" Lisa's words caught in her throat. She felt the weight of his accusations pressing down on her, the confidence she'd carried throughout the day crumbling into dust. "Michael has requested to meet with you personally," Mark said, his tone dropping back to its icy calm. "And let me be very clear, Lisa. You are walking on a razor's edge right now. How you handle this meeting will determine your future with this company. So I suggest you think very carefully about what you're going to say." Lisa's heart pounded in her chest as she nodded mutely. The humiliation, the regret, The fear, it all swirled inside her, threatening to overwhelm her. She had thought she was in control, but now it felt as though the ground beneath her had been ripped away. Mark opened the door, gesturing for her to follow. "He's waiting for you," he said curtly. "Good luck. You'll need it." Lisa's legs felt like lead as she rose from the chair. The walk through the hallway felt endless, each step echoing in her mind like a countdown to an inevitable reckoning. When she finally reached the sleek, glass-walled office at the top floor of the airline's headquarters, she hesitated at the door. Inside, Michael Grant sat at a large mahogany desk, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. The man she had dismissed so easily just hours ago now seemed larger than life, radiating authority. Lisa took a deep breath, willing herself to stay composed, and stepped into the office. She knew this wasn't just a meeting. It was a moment that would define her career and perhaps her entire perspective. Lisa stepped into the sleek, glass-walled office, her heart pounding in her chest. The room radiated authority, from the minimalist decor to the large mahogany desk at its center. Michael Grant sat behind it, his sharp navy suit tailored to perfection, his demeanor calm but undeniably commanding. Gone was the casual man from the plane, replaced by the CEO of the airline, someone whose mere presence demanded respect. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Take a seat, Lisa," he said, his tone steady and unreadable. Lisa hesitated for a fraction of a second before obeying, lowering herself onto the leather chair. She gripped its armrests tightly, trying to steady her shaking hands. For a moment, Michael said nothing. He simply studied her, his piercing gaze making her feel as though he could see straight through her. The silence was deafening, and Lisa's nerves frayed with each passing second. "Well, don't you tell me," Michael began, leaning back slightly in his chair. "What happened on that flight?" Lisa swallowed hard, her throat dry. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words tumbled out in a chaotic jumble. "Well, I thought I was acting in the best interest of the passengers," she stammered. Your hat, it seemed to be causing discomfort. I didn't want anyone to feel unsafe or unwelcome." Michael raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Unsafe or unwelcome," he repeated, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. "Go on." Lisa's voice faltered, but she pressed on, desperate to explain herself. "I believed it was my responsibility to address the situation. The hat, it's a symbol that carries a lot of weight. I thought it might create tension or even conflict. Alarmed also believed it represented. Is that correct? If I have spoken something different, put in your questions. I will ask again. What are some of the other important issues in your life?" Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Is that correct? Is I have spoken something different before?" There was a touch of argument. This is what might happen. Lisa's face burned with shame. "I was trying to protect the other passengers," she said weakly, though even to her the excuse sounded flimsy. Michael let the silence stretch between them for a moment before speaking again. "Lisa," he said, his tone firm but not unkind, "I wore that hat for a reason, and it has nothing to do with division or hate. For me, it represents something personal. A set of values rooted in unity, progress, and hope. It's a reminder of the challenges we've overcome as a company and as a nation. Lisa blinked, stunned by his words. She had assumed the worst, painted him with a broad brush, never once considering that his reasons for wearing the hat might be different from what she had imagined. Michael continued, his voice calm but unwavering. You let your assumptions cloud your judgment. You didn't ask me why I was wearing the hat, nor did you take a moment to assess whether I was actually causing any disturbance. Instead, you acted on your personal biases, and in doing so, you betrayed the mission of this airline. Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but Michael raised a hand, silencing her. Let me be clear, he said. This airline stands for respect for every passenger, no matter who they are or what they believe. It is not your job to police their attire or their opinions, especially when they're sitting quietly, bothering no one. Lisa felt as though the walls were closing in around her. Her confidence had crumbled entirely, replaced by a sinking sense of regret. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she had been trying to do the right thing, but she knew that any excuse she gave would only sound hollow. Michael leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. Here's the situation, he said, his tone shifting to one of finality. You have two options. The first, you resign immediately, no questions asked. Lisa's stomach dropped. The thought of leaving the career she had built, the job she had took so much pride in, was unbearable. I was instunning the Queen before she became Brianna Taylor. The second, Michael continued, is that you stay. But if you choose to stay, you will undergo comprehensive retraining in professionalism, ethics, and customer relations. You'll learn what it means to truly represent this airline's values. And let me make this very clear, there will be no second chances. If there's even one more incident like this, you'll be gone. Lisa's hands trembled in her lap. She felt humiliated, exposed, and yet, somewhere deep down, she knew Michael was right. She had let her personal beliefs cloud her judgment, and it had nearly cost her everything. I'll take the training, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to make this right. Michael studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good, he said simply. Then we're done here. I hope you understand how close you came to throwing away everything over a moment of poor judgment. Lisa nodded, unable to meet his gaze. As she stood to leave, Michael added one final statement, his voice softer but no less commanding. One more thing, Lisa. Respect is not just something we show others. It defines who we are. Think about that. Lisa walked out of the office feeling as though the weight of the world was pressing down on her shoulders. Her colleagues avoided her gaze as she passed through the hallway, their silence deafening. She had been given a second chance, but she knew it came with a price, the need to confront her own flaws and rebuild the trust she had shattered. As she stepped into the bustling terminal, one thought echoed in her mind. How could I have let my assumptions nearly cost me everything? Lisa sat alone in her small apartment that evening, staring at the neatly folded uniform draped over the back of a chair. Her mind replayed the events of the day with relentless clarity. The decision she had made, the confrontation, and the moment Michael Grant revealed the truth. She had been so certain, so convinced that she was acting righteously. Now all that remained was the bitter taste of regret, and the realization of how close she had come to losing everything she had worked for. The ultimatum Michael had given her echoed in her mind. She could walk away, resign quietly, and leave behind the career that had defined her for so long. Or she could stay, face her mistakes head on, and commit to the grueling process of rebuilding her reputation. Deep down, Lisa knew she couldn't run from this. She had let her emotions cloud her judgment, and now she had to take responsibility. The next morning, she reported to the airline's training center. The program was rigorous, filled with workshops on customer relations, ethics, and professionalism. Each session forced Lisa to confront her biases, to see how her assumptions had led her astray. It wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others, especially when she saw the wary glances from her colleagues. But she pressed on, determined to prove not only to them, but also to herself that she could do better. Through the process, Lisa began to see her role in a new light. She had always thought of herself as someone who upheld order, someone who ensured every passenger felt safe and respected. But now, she realized that respect wasn't about imposing her own beliefs. It was about understanding and valuing the perspectives of others, even when they differed from her own. Her transformation didn't happen overnight. At first, her colleagues were skeptical, unsure if her change was genuine. But Lisa showed them through her actions, going out of her way to listen, to learn, and to approach every situation with empathy. Slowly, the trust she had lost began to return. Angela, who had been her harshest critic after the incident, was the first to acknowledge the change. "You're different, Lisa," Angela said one day after a particularly difficult flight. "In a good way. I see it, and I think others do too." Lisa nodded, grateful for the validation, but knowing there was still work to be done. She threw herself into her job with renewed purpose, striving to embody the values she had once overlooked. Each interaction with a passenger became an opportunity to practice what she had learned, to approach every situation with patience and professionalism. The turning point came months later during a routine flight. A passenger had a minor complaint, one that might have irritated the old Lisa, but she handled it calmly, addressing the issue with care and ensuring the passenger felt heard. Her colleagues noticed the change, and for the first time, Lisa felt like she was truly living up to the standards she had always claimed to uphold. As she stood in the galley after that flight, a quiet sense of pride washed over her. It wasn't the same pride she had felt before the incident, the kind rooted in righteousness and authority. This was different, softer, more humble. It came from knowing she had grown, that she was learning to be better. In quiet moments, Lisa often thought about Michael Grant's words. His calm, measured tone still rang in her ears, especially the parting advice he had given her. Respect isn't just something we show others, it defines who we are. That truth had reshaped the way she approached her work and her life. She no longer saw her job as simply enforcing rules or maintaining order. It was about creating an environment where everyone felt valued, no matter who they were or what they believed. Looking back, Lisa realized that the incident had been a turning point, not just in her career, but in her personal growth. It had been painful, humbling, and at times unbearable, but it had also been necessary. She had learned the dangers of snap judgments, the harm that could come from letting personal biases dictate professional actions. More importantly, she had learned the value of humility, the importance of admitting when you're wrong and working to make things right. As Lisa walked through the airport one evening, heading home after another long flight, she passed by a family laughing together, a businessman engrossed in his phone, and a child clutching a stuffed animal. She smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her. These were the people she served, the ones who reminded her why she had chosen this career in the first place. For the first time in a long while, Lisa felt at peace. The weight of that day had lifted, replaced by a quiet confidence in who she was becoming. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And as she stepped out into the cool evening air, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of a better version of herself. Have you ever judged someone too quickly or experienced a moment that changed your perspective? Share your thoughts and tell us your own real-life stories in the comments. We'd love to hear how you handled moments like these and what lessons they taught you. Before you speak or act against someone, think twice. The person standing calmly, speaking kindly without anger or abuse, might be far more powerful and influential than they appear. Never underestimate simplicity. Sometimes, the most unassuming people hold the greatest strength. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories.